Hey guys, so it's the Pepper Preppers, and today we want to talk about $5 water solutions. And the reason for that is that you can just start free, you can move to $5, and you can move to $10. And what you'll find is that as you prep, you can actually afford more food storage because your food bills will be lower.
That is true.
So today we're going to start off with how much water do you need, and Catherine's going to go ahead and talk about that.
All right, so rule of thumb is what is recommended is 1 gallon per person per day, and that's just for your general drinking and cooking needs. And there's an additional 1 gallon per person per day recommended for hygiene needs. If you're good at conservation, you may not necessarily need that 2nd gallon for hygiene, but it's always a good idea to put into place. And as you're storing water, you also need to keep into consideration if you have any pets and livestock.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
It
and
is.
you may decide that you don't want as much for hygiene if it means you know that you're taking your animals into consideration.
Yes. So, and then when you're storing, we've got some different options as far as how to store. So, best way is always free. My favorite way to store water is in 3-liter soda bottles. As I know that milk jugs are not recommended because the plastic can hold on to the fats and sugars, and it can actually spoil your water. The plastic is really brittle. So if you store them in these milk jugs, you may come back a year later and have no water because it's all leaked out. But the 3-liter soda bottles are perfect for water storage. So
one of the other things is if you're going to store them in free containers, make sure that with those containers you were pouring from the container into a glass, that you weren't actually taking it to your mouth, because those plastic containers, they do harbor nasty things, especially if you're in a really warm environment where the water is going to sit there in a closed container and be super warm.
Right.
So I recommend that if you have stored it in those bottles, that you sterilize it as it comes out of the bottle.
I sterilize the bottle before I put the water in, and then I put, I believe the recommendation is 8 drops of bleach per gallon.
Yeah.
And so I'll drop some bleach. I'm on well water, so my water's not treated in general. So any water storage, I try to put a couple drops of bleach in there just to make sure that things are good. Because there's nothing worse than depending on something and then you go to use it and it is no good.
And the other thing is boiling, like just having a normal, let's see, can you see this? Just having a normal pot around. You can boil, if it has an off smell and yet it's the only water you have to depend on, you can boil it. You don't want to overboil it. The reason is because you're going to have a lot of evaporation. So once it boils, what is it that it's supposed to be boiling in order to sterilize things? Isn't there a certain amount of time? It's like 10 minutes or something?
I think so. I think it's 10-15 minutes.
So it's like a last resort because you are going to lose water to evaporation.
Right.
But a lot of times water that comes out of a bottle sometimes can be off flavored because of the plastic, and so if you throw in a tea bag into it, it helps it be more palatable. If you have something like that and the kids don't want to drink it, you can flavor it with other things to make it just a little easier.
I know that it'll lose oxygen as well, which will make it taste funky. Okay. And so it's recommended to pour it from one container to another just to re-oxygenate it.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different options there as far as making sure that your flavor is good.
Yeah, because the chlorine can make a difference if that's how you decide to treat your water. If you have water that needed to be stored in these bottles or any plastic container, a lot of people are worried about things like BPA and other things leaching into your water, especially if the plastic got warm. So one thing that you can do is actually treat it afterwards. I know that the Berkey filters can be used to treat water and take out just about anything that could be nasty. And so that is one thing for long-term storage you can kind of have in the back of your head, that if you're having to store it in a way that you're not necessarily as comfortable with, there are ways to treat it later so that you feel like it's safer to drink.
Agreed. Our location has low water table as it is. I'm in the high mountain desert. Water is always a concern. Our particular well on our property is very low producing, so conservation is something that we practice in general, but it is a skill that needs to be developed, and it's something that needs to be practiced by all family members. So you have to talk to your little ones about not running water when they're brushing their teeth, or Toilets, yeah. Never use your potable water to flush toilets or clean dishes, as you always want to use that as a secondary option. So potable water gets used for drinking and cooking, and then dirty water gets used for flushing toilets and general cleaning, I guess.
Yeah, and there's other options for that. and we'll show them to you in some of our other videos. You don't necessarily have to use a flush toilet in the middle of a crisis. You have everybody pee outside if they can. So there's other things. We're going to talk about hygiene in a different video, but we have quite a few tools to help you with that. So other storage options. Let's see. If you are afraid of plastic, you can actually take your canning jars and you can can water in your jars. You can use a hot pack canner, fill them with water up to the normal level, and then you can can in your water jars. And a lot of people like to do that just because when you're actually hot pack canning, if you don't want them to clink against each other, you put in an extra jar of water. And if you do that and you processed your jam, this will have been sterilized at that point. You can pull it out, you can put it on the shelf and store your water in your empty jars. And then when it's time to get your canning out again, you can just rotate it.
Yep. So this is quick, easy, and cheap. Not my favorite way to store water by far. I always have concerns putting them in the car because I do know that the warmer it gets, the more likely you are to have leaching from the plastics. But if this is your only option, water is water.
And as far as trying to stay on the $5 budget, I would say, if you're starting out and really all you have is your 3-liter bottles, fill them. And then if you are concerned about leaching, once you move to something like this, you can go and you can,
And they specifically say that they are BPA free.
Yeah.
My first official prep was one of these. And it was after we had our freezing episode and I was unable to provide water for our infant and it was really scary. I went out the next day and bought one of these. And it was weird, the sense of security and peace that we experienced just bringing home this container. So we go from small to bigger to bigger. There are other options as far as water storage. And I look at prepping as this layering thing. So you go small, you go free, you go cheap, and then you layer. So our next purchase after these 7 gallons was 55-gallon drums, and we've got a handful of those in our barn. And then our purchase after that was the big 275-gallon IBC totes. And so it's when you first start on your prepping journey, and Julie and I were talking about this last night, there seems to be this panic that you've recognized that there is a problem and there is a concern, and all of a sudden you've got this heavy weight on your shoulders that, oh my goodness, we are insecure. Mm-hmm. And so there's this panic that happens, and it's not always a sane panic. Like you just start packing your house full of preps because you are convinced that something terrible is going to happen. And so as we're going about this, we really want to give you the tools to go about it smart, and so that you don't repeat some of the mistakes that we made in our prepping journey. But our first preps was several cases of these, and then we moved into the 7-gallon. And I think had I been able to do it over, I'd just go straight into the 7 gallons and not even spend my money on these types of things.
Well, and that's how we felt about it. One of the least expensive ways you can get into some water storage and even food storage solutions is to get them free from family. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to a secondhand store and picking up a 5-gallon bucket. This you can sterilize pretty easily, but you're still kind of crossing your fingers. If you know that you went on Craigslist, for instance, and you found something from a little old lady who still had them in her canning boxes, and you knew that it had been used only for canning and it wasn't just a random jar or a random container at the secondhand store, you're pretty safe to do that. But you do want to be careful because some people might store things like solvents in their jars, or they might have been doing bug farm experiments, or they might just be really weird people doing really weird things. But when I got my canning jars and when I got my water containers, I got my water containers from my parents because they didn't need that many anymore. When I got my canning jars, I got them from a little old lady down the street for like $2 for the whole box, and it was a huge savings.
Our big 275-gallon IBC totes are used.
Yeah.
But I made sure to find out what product was put in them prior, and it was molasses.
Molasses, and that's what ours were too, was molasses.
And so we felt very safe about being able to store water in those containers, even knowing they were used.
If you let them be in sunlight, if they're clear, the IBC totes are generally clear. If you let them be in sunlight, they'll grow algae and other things. So if you can put them in a shaded area, keep them covered, keep them as cool as you can, it makes a huge difference.
Yep.
And when we store water for our livestock, that's where we would store it, would be in the big IBC tote.
That's what we use ours for.
So, all right, so we got up to the big ones. A good place to store your water is in the basement. It keeps them cool. If, however, your pipes freeze, I would say then you need to kind of be looking at, the bigger 55-gallon drums don't freeze very easily. The 5-gallon ones, they can freeze somewhat easily. If you store your smaller ones around your bigger ones, it helps to kind of even out the temperature. But a lot of times, if you do have like a really cold situation, a good place to go is the basement to keep your pipes from freezing or to keep your water from freezing. And then have everything be in the same room, have you and your family in the same room, keep the doors shut, keep the curtains shut, conserve the heat if you don't have a wood stove.
And we don't have a basement, but I'm also in an area where it does get cold. We do have winter, but it's not the same temperatures that Julie's dealing with. And so we keep our containers in either our garage or our barn.
Yeah.
And we haven't had issues with them freezing.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move on to treatment. We could start with just the simplest one, which is to boil. If you know that your water is, already well treated and you just want to sterilize it a little bit, you wouldn't even have to put chlorine in these if you are using your hot pack canner to use these for water storage.
Right.
And because those are so recyclable, you buy them once and you don't have to buy them again as long as they don't get chipped. So that's the other thing is, notice on your jars when you're buying them, you want to look at the rim.
Yeah, that is very important. If you've got little nicks or chips, the jar is no good.
Jar's no good if you do that. You can use it for a drinking jar if you're careful, I guess, but you don't want to use it for canning.
Right. And I definitely wouldn't have your kids drinking out of a chip jar.
Yeah.
So here is another treatment option, and this is it's a cautionary tale. So I know that bleach has a life expectancy after a period of time, and I think that they recommend you store it for no more than a year before it starts degrading and becoming ineffective. And a longer term option is pool shock, but there are some things that you need to know about it. It is extremely caustic, and I bought these, they're little 1-pound bags. I stored them in this container knowing that they will eat through their packaging. And in fact, I brought this with me to show you guys, and I realized as I got it out that the pool shock has completely eaten through the plastic packaging on this. And I am really glad that we put it in some sort of storage container, because I would have had pool shock all over my barn.
Yep. It would hurt your animals, it would hurt your kids, it would, if you breathe it in, it's a really big problem. I mean, this stuff is the nasty, super concentrated, kill you stuff.
Yes. And I would recommend looking up the treatment protocol using pool shock, because you use just very little. You dilute it, and then you dilute it again, and then you add it to like your 250-gallon drum. I mean, it's minute amounts. Grains. Yeah. So do look up the instructions as far as treating water with pool shock. And you don't want it to have any additives. You don't want it to be something that has coloring or anything extra. You want to make sure that it is purely 100% just the one chemical, not a combination of chemicals, and you need to do your own research on it. Don't take our advice. You do need to look up what the concentration should be and whether or not you should even use it. Yes. And I'd say the same on bleach. Do your own research on quantities needed to treat water. Yep. Alright, so there are other ways to filter your water. They're a little bit more involved. You can build like a sand filter. A homemade filter using, I think it's a layer of gravel, a layer of sand, charcoal, and let your water run through that. If you want it to be super, super clean, I think a Berkey. We're just going to put it out there. It's really expensive. It's something you could save your money for, but you can buy cheaper Berkeys. You can make your own kind of Berkey, and you would probably, if you're making your own, want to have
run some water through it, some normal water through it, and have it tested to see what it's like. You do want to not just kind of blindly follow that it is working.
Right.
I don't think it's a bad idea to have things tested.
I agree. And I know on the Make Your Own Berkey that they sell the filters, the replacement filters, and so you don't necessarily have to buy their equipment. You can buy their filters and then make your own.
Exactly.
Oh.
Let's see, what else do we have? You can use UV to treat your water. I'm not really that familiar with it, but it is an option.
That's one of the advantages of the 3-liter soda bottles being clear plastic, is you can put them outside in the light and have the UV disinfectant, and it's in theory will kill all the bacteria.
And that one is in theory, and if you're having to take it out of like a river or something, you're probably going to want to boil it first.
Yeah.
Filter it first,
boil it, UV.
Treat it with something, put it in the bottles. I mean, this is not something where you want to mess around with something that's going to be in a closed container if you do not know that it's clean. You really don't.
Oh, although, I guess sometimes in a situation, and I'm definitely not wanting to give bad advice here, but some water is better than no water. We had a situation in my community where search and rescue was dispatched to go find a couple who had, their Jeep had flipped, they got stuck out in the wilderness, and the husband drank dirty water out of the creek. The wife refused to. Both survived. She has permanent kidney damage due to it.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, I'm not sure how to recommend going about it, but be wise, make good decisions. Survival and being sick is better than death. So it's a balancing act.
And that's why we highly recommend keep an emergency kit in your car. In my emergency kit, I have a little pan that could be used for sterilizing water. I have iodine tablets, I have my life straw, and I have ways to start fires, so that if you have something like that where you're still with your vehicle and you haven't been separated from it, you have multiple ways of sterilizing. Because with something like a life straw, you stick it in the river and you suck out of it and you have completely clean water. You can have really, really bad water and still drink with a life straw, or you can put your iodine on, or you can like use your shirt or something to filter a lot of like particulates out of the water first. But I mean, if you don't have a container even to put water into, it's kind of hard to carry it from one distance to another.
It is. Yeah.
You really start to think about these things when you think, okay, say the world didn't end, but my car broke down somewhere and I've got to take a long walk to go get a mechanic, or I've got to take a long walk to go get gas. Wouldn't it be nice if I had a container to put water into? Say I was somewhere and like at a campsite, and I could fill my water container, and then I could walk to wherever I needed to go.
Right.
Those kind of things. Even something just as simple as a container. Okay, so we talked Berkey, homemade, boiling, and then, okay, so I think we pretty much covered all of that as far as like, okay, so the last thing we wanted to say is that there is an emergency tool that kind of takes all the guesswork out of it. I'm not sure how much they cost. We actually need to look these up. We'll put the link to this in Amazon down below.
I think I paid $19 for our life straw.
So if you were to save for a month at $5 a week, and you were to save for a month, you would be able to get something like this.
Right. And this treats what, 10,000 gallons?
A lot of water.
Yeah.
Everybody in your family can drink out of it. I would say prep first by getting some 3-liter bottles with some water in it.
Yep.
But have the fact that this is a complete system in the back of your head to know, when I get to that point, this is something that I need to have on hand if I wanted to be able to filter water.
We've looked at, and again, it's that multi-layered approach. First, we stocked our home. So we made sure that our home was secure as far as water goes. And then I worked on our get home bag. And so this was not an immediate purchase on my end, but it was on the priority list, but it wasn't the hot priority.